So welcome to another of our Exponential Race to the Top sessions, at this time with a focus on the next generation of building materials. Cement, for example, and how it can contribute to even remove carbon. Wow, that sounds very exciting. Let's dive right into this and introduce our guests. First, we have Chris Nadel. He's carbon removal lead at the UN Climate Champions team. And if I've done your last name wrong, you feel free to absolutely correct it. We were having a debate here in Santa Marta whether it was needle or nadle, but
it's actually nidal. So split the difference.
It's nidle. Okay, then we've got it right. Yeah. Thank you very much. And then we've got perhaps Pia Prestmo from Heidelberg Materials in Oslo, Norway, joining us at some moment. And we've got Johan Falk, co-founder and head of Exponential Roadmap Initiative, coming in from Stockholm. Hi, Johan. Johan, maybe we can start with you first. Why is the material transformation important to phase out fossil fuels, and why is cement so critical?
So great to be here again, Nick. The energy transformation is already on its way. You know, renewable energy, solar, wind, electrical vehicles are scaling exponentially, and we passed the tipping points. And that can take us to almost the first halving of global emissions. But that's not sufficient. We also need to accelerate the material transformation, and we have to do that in parallel in order to address the second halving. And we talked about steel previously, and another extremely important material is cement, which represent maybe 7 to 8% of the global emissions. So it has to be decarbonized. We need to work with a portfolio of solutions, of course, using less cement, reused, new binders, clean heating, carbon capture. So the task is really to create the lead demand to take us to the positive tipping point for the next generation solutions of cement. So it's incredibly important and an incredible opportunity.
Good, Johan. And you are also driving the scaling of carbon removals from the Exponential Roadmap Initiative. How do you see the opportunity to combine this with the next generation cement?
Yeah, this is even more exciting. Well, as you mentioned, I would say the world, companies, cities, and countries need to scale up carbon removals in the parallel to driving mitigation of carbon emissions. That's absolutely necessary, and it has to start today. And that's a requirement on all actors. So that's something we're driving. But as you mentioned, there is really a tremendous opportunity if we can combine these things, actually make cement carbon negative, because that would makes it possible to make buildings and infrastructure rather an opportunity than a problem. So I'm really excited to talk about this today with our actors on the call.
Okay, thank you very much, Johan. Let's go across to Chris. Chris, I know that the backdrop looks like Santa Marta, but where are you actually coming in from?
I'm actually in Montreux, Switzerland right now, but I'm a New Yorker natively, but I'm here for a work trip.
Okay, super. So Chris, due to its carbon-intensive binding ingredient, cement makes concrete responsible for nearly 7% of global emissions. However, it also holds gigaton potential as a carbon sink. Can you explain the pathways and methods that hold the greatest promise in driving carbon removal in concrete?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just tag on to something that was just said by Jonas is, carbon removal is sort of a newer layer of action that really over the last decade it's become much clearer how imperative it is. And the numbers are quite large in terms of how much we'll have to do in addition to mitigation just to stay within 1.5 or 2C. What we've learned over the last several years as different solutions have unfolded is that the key to scale for many of these pathways is through integration with existing high volume, high magnitude industries with big outputs. So whether you're talking about mining or agriculture, waste management, but concrete and cement are really, really significant. And a lot of, for the reasons that were just stated, is that it's the most used material after water in the world, and we're not going to be using less of it. We're going to be using more of it, and it's foundational to our built environment. So the key is what's exciting about concrete is that there's many different ways to run the CDR pathways through the material. One which Pia will probably speak to is actually at the cement plant itself, the ability to retrofit or build new plants that have bioenergy combustion with carbon capture. So the negative emissions part comes from the fact that you're using biomass, which has already taken the CO2 down. And then the incineration of that, it's captured and then either put into products or geologically stored. But other parts of it, the remainder of the concrete material, the vast majority of it is actually aggregate and other materials, which is usually just sand and gravel. In here, there's other waste streams you can take, like municipal waste, agricultural waste, to turn it into biochar, which is an amazing material that can either be used as part of that aggregate material or as a substitute for some cement. And that can be made but through many different ways all over the world. And then the other, which is very exciting, is the mineralization of carbon, either from the air or from flue stacks, that turns it into a carbonate, which already has benefits when it's added to cement, but you can also use that as a mix within the aggregate, which is, again, most of the mass. So what's exciting about it, it's a huge opportunity volume-wise, but it's also, there's many different forms of CDR that can converge with other benefits as well, in addition to storing carbon, that all land within that most used material on Earth.
Okay, Chris, thanks very much for explaining that in so much detail. Just a supplementary question before we go to our next guest. What are some of the real-world practical barriers that limit the development and commercialization of carbon-negative materials in concrete, and how might that be overcome?
There's a lot of different parts. Part of it has to do with the industry itself. Cement is a pretty consolidated global industry with global suppliers, but concrete remains something that's very localized. Most of it's carried out by small local businesses. And so it's a very difficult job, and it's a very high demand material that literally is at the basis of everything that we build. And so sometimes it defies fancy things as a commodity. So to try to do something to change the formula of it from what we've been doing quite effectively from a structural point of view is a big ask, almost a culture shift. It's also something that we can't do just quickly because these are the things that we build buildings with. So we need to be it's a highly regulated, understandably, material. And so changes that get added to those materials that are put in, have to be really, really thoroughly assessed. And that process can take a while. And then it is the matter of cost. Some of the things are not a very big cost impact, but some are. Some are to add decks to a cement plant. That's a big capital project in a very, very globally competitive industry. So there's a number of things from just the logistics of it, the culture of it, and certainly the economics of it that make it very difficult. I think some of the policies that have come, we're already seeing in a very short period of time, from the local all the way up, shifts. One that I think is really important is governments. The public sector globally purchases about 40% of all concrete. They have levers in their own procurement decisions, which that we already use for green purchasing. So to give either premiums or selection advantages to concrete that comes in that actually has a certain global warming potential, whether it's really low or negative, is one way to give a really material boost. And there are many other ways as well, but I think that's a very, very important lever that's uniquely powerful for concrete, given how much the public sector buys.
Okay, good. Stay with us. Let's go now to Pia. Pia, I don't know if you came slightly late, but I did introduce you when I started the show, but we'll do it again. Pia Prestmo from Heidelberg Materials in Oslo, Norway. Pia, can you tell me, and more importantly, can you tell the audience about Heidelberg Materials and how far have you come on this journey that, in a sense, we're talking about today?
Hi, and thank you all for including us in this. Halve Materials is, I believe, is the world's largest cement manufacturer, aside from China. Also one of the largest ones when it comes to concrete and aggregates. So we do carry quite a bit of the responsibility in terms of the emissions that stems from cement manufacturing. The good news is that last June, we opened the world's first full-scale carbon capture facility at our cement plant in Brevik in Norway. We are selling currently the world's first carbon capture cement on the market, making it possible to reduce the emissions that stem from concrete with up to 90%, which is quite the paradigm change, yeah? So you mentioned CDRs, that's part of the puzzle, but for us, green premiums is really like the big lever that needs to be taken into effect here. For Europe, there's a cap on the emissions. They're phasing down this cap until in 2040, it's going to be, for all practical circumstances, pretty much illegal to emit CO2. So this CCS for us is also a license to operate, basically. But the way out of this is either or both CDR and also green premiums. And here the politicians have the opportunity to walk the talk, if you like, to actually not just put price as a parameter, but also the emissions, or hopefully price the emissions into the into the building contracts, yeah? So you basically need three things to make CCS work. You need a place to store it. You need public-private collaboration in order to have this risk sharing of building the carbon capture facility itself. But then the big lever is to pull from the demand side. You need to sell the carbon capture products. You need to have a business case or it's not going to work.
Absolutely.
Question on that then. So where is the carbon being stored?
It's been stored just outside the west coast of Norway, 2.5 kilometers under the seabed into formations in the rock. And Norway has been capturing, transporting, and storing CO2 since 1996, so 30 years of experience. We are part of the Longship project, which is a public-private partnership. They have now drilled holes into the seabed for the first time, hoping not to find oil and gas, because these are wells just for storing CO2.
Yeah. Okay, good. And just another question here. What are your goals and plans, and how do you turn it into an advantage, presumably a business advantage?
Oh yeah, 100%. We are the first mover in our industry. We are the ones who have gone all in. So Brevik will hopefully be the first of many projects like this. Last fall, we signed an agreement with the UK authorities, and they started building just before Christmas our second big CCS facility in Pagewood, which will capture twice as much as in Brevik, so 800,000 tons per year in Wales. So looking forward to that. And we're also looking at other projects around the world, but most of them in Europe.
So I hope it's not too noisy for you, by the way, on the other side of the world from where I am. It's quite noisy here in the center that we're at in Santa Marta. Everyone's very excited about this conference. So to all, it's a question. Okay, so enablers and blockers, right? We touched a little bit on that, but who wants to take up the enablers and blockers line on this? Johan, do you want to have a quick go at that? Or somebody else?
Okay, I do. I'll just say I do think Pia gave a very good sort of breakdown. Is that we have to be pricing, carbon into it. If we want a product that has either zero carbon or negative carbon, that's a service that's valuable. So the economics of it really have to work. It can't just be penalties. There has to be an actual market making. There has to be demand created for it, and the public sector can really lead on it. So I thought Pia's summary was quite good, but go ahead, Johan, sorry to cut you off.
No, that's great. I think it's already mentioned. I mean, the public procurement will be a key enabler. And for example, Europe could put a common target together stating that by 2035, 50% should be green cement, for example, in public procurement, and scale that up year by year. I'm very much in favor of also having positive targets of scaling up solutions, not just cutting emissions, and to drive it as in order to create the competitive advantage for the countries who like to go in the forefront. So I think that's important. Also providing incentives for companies transforming. So we need both not only sticks, but actually strong carrot policies and incentives, just to mention two things in order to accelerate and go faster.
I would also add the CBAM, so carbon border adjusted mechanisms. One of the really big challenges that a commodity like cement faces is that if you go forward and you implement low carbon and that raises your pricing, it's a global commodity and you'll get undercut by a dirtier product. And so these CBAMs, like which Europe, which are meant to adjust for that, that's really literally just now going into place. And I think that will have a large impact globally, particularly on that market, and hopefully others will follow.
Well, what about the price of carbon? I mean, in Europe, you've seen some industries wanting to actually see the emissions trading scheme lower the price of carbon, saying that large swathes of European industry might go bankrupt because the price is too high. Is that, should we hold firm on the carbon price? Firmer? Less firm?
Pia, I'd be curious to get Pia's point of view, because there's a difference with this, is there's kind of two routes that can be taken. There's a version of reality or a world in which the primary driver of decarbonization of cement and concrete are not carbon markets, but rather a market for low or zero cement and concrete, where it would be based on delivering a product that actually has those properties. But Pia, I don't know if you have something to say at all about that, about the role of carbon markets or just GWP.
Well, first of all, we need to stick to the plan with the phasing out of the free allowances under the European Union's emission trading scheme. There were, for example, leakages from the European Commission a couple of months ago that stated that there might be a postponement of the phasing out of the free allowances. And then immediately our stock price went down 10%. So you can't have a system where there's insecurity about the pathway, because then you punish the first mover. And if Heidelberg Materials is not able to make this work, nobody else is going to follow. I can tell you that much. And not only in our industry, but also other industries. So we need to have a system that does not punish first movers. We also need to face more of the revenue that's coming into the EU ETS and also other CO2 taxes sourced back to the industry itself. That should be the purpose. Or else it's just another fiscal tax, yeah? So it has to make more sense. That's also been the criticism among, the more EU ETS skeptic countries in Europe, such as Italy, for example. They call the EU ETS just another tax. Just to strengthen the foundation, just source more of the money back to the industry, to the purpose that was made in the first place. And also, but the big lever, public procurement was mentioned. In Norway, where I'm calling in from, we recently had amendments to the public procurement law stating that all public procurement should be weighed 30% in environment and climate. But what does that mean exactly? So now I had a meeting with the ministry earlier today looking at how we can operationalize this. Are we talking about a cap on emissions from, for example, 150 kilos of CO2 per cubic meter of concrete? Or are we talking, you know what I mean? You have to be specific about this, because public procurement is some countries up to 50% of the revenue to the cement companies. So like I said, the politicians need to walk the talk.
Exactly.
I mean, I suppose the question is, what do you need from other countries, Pia? I mean, because, Norway is one country, the European Union is another. A lot of the new concrete, presumably, is in the developing world, or we call it the developing world, emerging economies, but also rapidly developing economies like China. How does one square that circle in terms of rules, regulations, guidelines to encourage this kind of, breakthrough materials that you're actually dealing with?
Yeah, I think I want to point out two things. One is that there are several ways to cut emissions from our industry, not only carbon capture and storage. 2/3 of our emissions stem from processing the limestone that you need to make cement. So CO2 is inherent in the limestone. 1/3 is from the energy part. And it's possible to phase out all the coal and replace it with alternative fuels, i.e. waste from industry and homes. That's one way of doing it. Also, how you make the cement, you can make it many different ways to lower the emissions, and that's being done in several African countries, for example, to lower the cost. In terms of what should be done on a global scale, it's like, if I could be the president of the world, I would like to have like a global cap on emissions and one global market. I think we all agree that, that would perhaps be the most efficient, but not necessarily doable. But it's gonna, I think maybe we're looking at regional borders, carbon borders like CBAM you mentioned, Chris. But that also during COP was something that was criticized by Asian countries, African countries, because they look at it as a more of a protective tool, that Europe is trying to protect its own industries, creating some friction, so yeah, but I think maybe regional borders would be one step ahead. Carbon borders, yeah.
Chris, so as mentioned, the public sector purchases nearly 40% of all concrete produced globally. Are there some other approaches in the public procurement area that could build a market for carbon negative concrete? I mean, are there things that are not happening in the public procurement area that could start being part of that landscape?
Yeah, and one thing I'll say too, we use the term carbon negative, and then you can use near zero, low carbon. It's all really a continuum. You're chipping away at different sources of emissions, or you're laying on different solutions. So it's not, there's some special factory that will in the future do this and one will do that. It's really all blended in there, literally. It's quite a fascinating sector. People don't pay attention to it because we take it so for granted. But yeah, one of the things that, kind of building on what Pia said, that I think is a really interesting way to use procurement. As was mentioned, there are things like most economically advantaged, tariffs, which are, you can set 30, even up to 50% of the points for public procurement around sustainability or non-least cost sort of factors. But I also like the idea of there being a continuum where you don't just draw a line and say, this is what we've done a lot in the United States with something called Buy Clean, where the government decides every so often, here's the line that you have to get under. I think that's not really utilizing the market in the way that I think is most beneficial. I think it's good to not just set a penalty line and say, we'll only procure concrete underneath this level, but add other incentives for the better you do. So if you have a Brevik facility that's producing cement that you've taken out the largest, emissions factor of concrete, and then the other things can be done for it. They shouldn't be incentivized at the same level of someone who's marginally reducing it. There should be a higher incentive for it. And so I think if we start to add these continuums of either bid preferences or premium allowances based on what your global warming potential is, then you're going to start activating the market to keep reaching further and further to dig deeper and deeper into GWP. I like that idea with what's called an advanced market commitment, and I'll be quick. We do this a lot. There might not be a product that's yet on the market, but you can have governments and private sectors signal that they're willing to buy this thing once it's on the market. And I think we could do that with concrete, with procurement right now, where you could get state actors and non-state actors coming together and pledging a certain amount of purchasing power and saying, hey, within the next 5 years, if you bring through your GC a carbon negative concrete, we are going to give you a very, very handsome benefit or incentive that could help you win a much bigger project. So there's a lot of creative things you can do by twisting the knobs of procurement.
To an end, and I'm going to give the final word in a second to Johan, just to wrap up. But we are at a conference here or the first conference on the transition away from fossil fuels here in Santa Marta, Colombia. And as you know, the last COP, there were 80-odd countries that wanted to start the process of phasing out fossil fuels, but some countries said no. And of course, consensus always works in the UN. But what does it mean for, say, Heidelberg? Or what does it mean for this story of, of more eco-friendly concrete and cement and this sort of thing? What does it mean if you've got a large majority of countries now looking at national plans to phase out fossil fuels? Is that good for this business model up here?
Yeah, you need the offtake. I mean, this is not a technical challenge anymore. It's about scaling. We know how to do it. We just need to see the products fly off the shelf.
Right. Yeah. And Chris, briefly?
No, I just absolutely agree with Pia. It's really, you got to create the signal for why someone would buy that. There's certainly technical changes that we can make. There are other innovations, but a lot of the heavy lifting we already know how to do. It's about getting the right specifications, the permitting of it, and then creating the demand, and then it will fly off the shelves. So it's a market failure, not a technical failure, largely at this point.
Great. Johan, what's your takeaway then from this session that can be like a call to action?
I think there is, when we listen to Pia and Chris, there is really an opportunity to create a similar exponential roadmap for near zero or carbon negative concrete, just as for electrical vehicles and renewable energy. And that is what we should aim for. It's both necessary and possible. And I think in the stage we are now, because we are very early on the curve, basically, the key point, I think, is to bring together the coalition of the willings, which basically drives demand practically, the cities and the regions and the countries who actually implement the key policies in order to start scale together with the suppliers. So in order to take us as quickly as possible to what we call a positive tipping point, because then we can get all others on board. And it's very much about economy, of course, but you need that coalition, I think, of the willing to take us to the positive tipping point as quickly as possible.
Well, that was all perfect, and perfect timing as well, because 7 seconds to go and we go to the next show. So I'd like to ask my colleagues to move on and we go to our next guest. Thank you.
Thank you so much.